What does it take to make workshops work? And how can we facilitate collaboration that sticks and leads to results? My name is Miriam Hackness, and with the Workshops Work podcast, I'm on the mission to find the magic ingredients that make workshops work. Today with me on the show is Barb Pedersen, who's been a facilitator for over 28 years. And we speak about facilitation trends, methods, core skills, basically geek out about facilitation. So stay tuned. And by the way, if you don't have pen and paper at hand to take your own notes, scroll down to the show notes to download my free one-page summary. And now lean back to be inspired. Barb Pedersen, I am thrilled to finally have you on the show.
Thank you. I am also thrilled to be here and to be part of Never Done Before community.
Yes, I've been tiptoeing around your content for such a long time. And you've been in the facilitation world forever, I almost say. And let's start at the beginning. When did you start calling yourself a facilitator?
Officially, I started when I started my business 28 years ago. And it's so funny to hear you comment that I've been around forever, because in a way I feel that way, yet I also feel that everything is new continually. So I would say officially I started to call myself a facilitator in 1994 when I started my business. Looking back, I know it was a deliberate choice because I had worked for 16 years in government recreation and parks and community development, went out on my own and was doing the exploration of what am I going to be, and realized that what I did was facilitation. I also, though, wondered about the use of the term consultant, because I was also able to consult on strategic planning. And at that time, there was in the recreation parks and community world, a phenomenon called master planning. So I started with helping organizations master plan, and that's being more of a consultant, which is you bring in your expertise. And it comes down to, do I make recommendations or not? I realized very quickly that my love, my joy, my passion, my abilities was as a facilitator to pull out the wisdom of the group and let them make their decisions. So that's when I started saying, okay, I am a facilitator. And then really quickly to summarize this, looking back over my career before, I realized I'd been doing facilitation work. Yet didn't call myself. So 28 years, with the first year being, am I a consultant? And no, I'm a facilitator.
And I love the distinction of, am I giving advice or not? So a consultant giving advice, a facilitator not giving it. And I wonder to what extent this is related to the concept of neutrality.
The whole concept of neutrality and a facilitator being objective is something that was very core to me. And then in the last 2 or 3 years, I've started to rethink that. So let's start with the first part, the consultant giving advice, the facilitator being neutral and objective. And yes, I firmly believe that, facilitation is this great quote that I read. So facilitation is the art of drawing out what people intrinsically know and letting them own it. It's the art of observing, reflecting, guiding, and giving back. And it's by a woman named Ruth Hild, which I have tried to find out who she is and haven't yet. And I love that, the art of drawing out what people intrinsically know. So I still believe a facilitator is, as much as possible, objective and neutral as the group works through what it is. A consultant does make recommendations. A consultant, to me, brings in their expertise, brings in their content knowledge, shares that with the group, and the group takes that in and works that in. So, for example, I facilitate a lot in strategic planning, and I will offer a strategic planning process and then as a facilitator help them work through it. I don't tell them whether they should have this strategy or this goal in their plan. That's their content. So still a firm believer in that. And a distinction I often make is a facilitator, a facilitative trainer, a facilitative leader, a facilitator consultant, where your first role may be as that trainer and you're doing it in a way that is very facilitative. So drawing on the wisdom, letting the group bring their own. And that's coming out of Roger Schwartz, the skilled facilitator, who's one of my, probably he doesn't know it, but he's one, I consider him a mentor. And so what has changed, because I want to touch on that quickly, the neutrality to me has changed because of diversity, equity, inclusion, racism, etc. And I have been following, particularly with the Black Lives Matter, and then here in Canada, very much Indigenous truth and reconciliation work. I've really been following colleagues and highly regarded facilitators talking about we come out of our neutral stance when there is racist and stereotypical comments being made. And we acknowledge that with the group and how we feel about it and encourage the conversation around that. So that's no longer being neutral about that aspect.
Yeah.
So that's something that I'm still really working through, Miriam, as to how to work that into my core beliefs about the group has the content, the knowledge.
Interesting perspective on the concept of neutrality, that the facilitator may, and sometimes even has the responsibility to take a stance. And what just came to my mind is also the recommendations that a facilitator makes as opposed to a consultant. From what I hear, it's the facilitator recommends a certain process that will eventually help the group to come to their own conclusions and strategy. And still somehow I have the impression that a good facilitator is also good in synthesizing what the group has said. And then it's maybe not a recommendation based on their own reflections and their own wisdom as a facilitator, but synthesizing, extracting the wisdom of the group to give recommendations based on what they have found through the process.
I think it goes back to that definition about facilitation being the art of drawing out the group's intrinsic wisdom and then reflecting it back, presenting it back, and letting them own it.
Yeah.
And I touched on a little bit because a lot of the core competencies of facilitation, and I really like the ones put out by the International Association of Facilitators, and I try to honor our global professional association. There's often not, I think, a recognition of how important that synthesis is. And beyond paraphrasing, which is a great skill, but at times a group wants a facilitator to synthesize, give it back to the group. This is what I heard. What do you think about that? And I work with a group, often in the pre-session, workshop, event, whatever we want to call it, meeting, to clarify how much of that they want me to do. It's not expertise and consulting about the topic. It is bringing in an ability to listen, hear, and then pull the nuggets out and say, this is what I'm hearing, or these what you are thinking. And to go with that quickly is the writing ability. I just did a 2-hour World Cafe for the help colleague. Called in, and this was a week ago, and it was 3 rounds of conversation in a World Cafe online. And we had 2 questions, which 3 groups came to us individually and talked about. And so they only had about 30 minutes. 10 people, there's not a lot of facilitation work going on. There is inviting them to talk, listening, and then recording and pulling out, because that was one of our responsibilities, recording and pulling out the core messages and themes that they were talking about. So I think at times in the facilitation world, that ability to synthesize and then to record in the sense of, here are the main things that you have said, I'm putting it into some kind of a captured data format with, is really missed. And I groups want it. My clients want me to be able to do that.
And I think this is where the high art comes in, because it requires to deeply listen, as you said, to listen what is said, to hearing what is not said, to reflecting it back. And then also the ability not to mix it up with our own belief system and in our own lens. So this is where the neutrality comes in.
Yes.
And the inner game of letting them own it and not being attached to our own interpretation. So I think this is, it's a very sophisticated skill, this synthesizing, because
yes.
Paraphrasing is basic. Everyone can paraphrase. Everyone who can hear words can paraphrase. Synthesizing is, as you said, pulling out the nuggets, bringing it into a new form so that it appreciates the value and maybe even opens the door for a deeper conversation.
And I like that comment about opening the door for a deeper conversation, because an alternate approach to the synthesis is to invite the group to do that. And as often as I can, that is what I do. And we have had this type of a conversation. Maybe it's some type of a pair, share, discovery conversation. Maybe it's some type of small group back into the large group, and then invite someone in the group to summarize, to synthesize what they hear. And that's my preferred method, recognizing that at times the client organization very much wants and will say, Barb, would you please do that? Because we just need to hear how somebody else outside of the 8 of us is hearing this. So, Miriam, it's such a fine balance, because we do not, as you said, want to take away the ownership of the group, the responsibility of the group, and our role in it, because I still think a facilitator is part of the group and doesn't stand away, part of the group with a specific role. So that it's a fine balance of who, when, and how, and why do we do that synthesis.
Yeah,
I don't want it forgotten as a core competency.
Yes. Thank you for pointing that out. And a big responsibility.
Oh, yes.
Because through the synthesis, it might put the conversation into one direction or another. And then depending on the maturity of the group as well, are they picking up on what the facilitator said, or do they dare to challenge it?
Yes.
Are they making it their own, or do they feel maybe manipulated? So there's a lot of nuances that also play into that, which has to do with power dynamics between the group and the facilitator, trust.
Definitely.
Yeah.
It is, you say it's a very complicated role. And I think it's very important that we as facilitators go first to the group. And then there is, I have over the years followed wonderful posts about the power of the pen and the concept of the group records on a flip chart instead of the facilitator. And that's a really good illustration of hopefully the synthesis, the power belongs with the group. And then again, very simple, concrete example is that if the facilitator is doing the recording, which many groups want, even when you're in a large group and using that kind of a method, you write exactly what they say. Or you're doing it online and you write exactly what you say. So I, as much as possible, recognize that important skill of synthesis and as much as possible, try to get the group to do it.
Yeah. Although I'm being aware that very often we hear what we want to hear. Mm-hmm. So we may all listen to the same talk. And when 20 people listen to the same speech and you ask them for the highlight or the synthesis, most probably you will get 20 different opinions or 20 different lenses on what the core message was, depending on what they wanted to hear and what mattered to them. Mm-hmm. And I wonder how can you control for that if you're inviting the group to record? Because none of those who are in the workshop by definition is unaffected and really neutral. They all have a role. They all might have an agenda. So either everyone has to record and then it's like a World Cafe style. I think that's at the heart of the World Cafe, right? That everyone records and everyone supervises the recording and adds to it. And then it's complete and unbiased. Otherwise, it's difficult, I think.
I think of methods, and that's what just popped into my mind when you said, so how do we do that? And quite often it is, what is the process? What is the purpose? What are the products, the outcomes, the results that the group wants? And then, what's the design, the flow, the methods to use? And there are fundamental methods that I use and that I really believe a facilitator benefits from having some fundamental methods. And they allow for that contribution by everyone from their own perspective, and then working it through into what is the core message that this group is conveying, and then deciding. So it's that allowing, that divergent, what Sam Kainer calls the divergent participation, the many, many, many ideas, allowing those kind of discussions to happen through good design, through good methods, and working with the group to let them know they're doing this, and then bringing it back in to the convergence. I'm using all my hands, which no one's going to see.
Yep, there will be a recording.
Right, and that's the point where, what have we heard? What are the main messages? And it happens in so many different ways, Miriam. It's the card consensus method. It's, clustering. It's affinity clustering. And there are many, many ways of doing that. It's just recognizing that those methods need to allow everyone's contribution, everyone to feel safe to contribute and feel that their contribution is valued. And then, what does it mean? I just read this wonderful article about the individual, the right of the individual and the right of the collective. And the example was around one person in, probably a group of 20 having a very strong opinion, and the rest of the group simply not agreeing with it. And so it's that balance then of, with the group, what are we doing about this? And when does the right of the collective, which I'm kind of moving away from our first topic, but when does the right of the collective come through as opposed to the right of the individual? And I think it's one of the beliefs that the value of the benefit of a group, the conversation that a group of people, a group of individuals coming together, what they achieve is so powerful. It's that also that balance, the right of the individual, the right of the collective.
Yeah. And then what is the long-term goal? Mm-hmm. If, as you mentioned earlier, it's so important that at the end the group owns it, because otherwise a workshop will just remain a workshop and nothing happens with the insights afterwards. Someone has to carry them forward outside of the workshop space. And this is only done if everyone feels the ownership to it.
I'm a firm believer in application of anything. And, if I'm going to look at a flow, people discover, explore, may dream, may design, may decide, then I like the application or the action. And that's part of what I know is my preference. So anything that is decided, I like having it apply back into what is your reality? What is your work or your volunteer or your personal situation that this topic has been about, and we've come together in some type of a facilitated conversation. Okay, how are you going to apply it? And how are you going to act upon it? And I have seen, wonderful and being part of and facilitated wonderful workshops where you reach a decision stage and everybody's really excited. And then you move into whether it's as simple as what are the next steps that we're going to do? What do we do to act on this? Or it's a very, very formal, because the group has asked for it, who, what, when, where. And if the stoppage in conversation happens there is so many things that are going on that you need to explore. So I really like encouraging a group to have some type of conversation, brief to lengthy about, so what are we doing with this now? We made this decision. How do we act upon it? And they're very willing to. Yet it also can be a moment of anxiety because the abstract goes into practical and reality.
Yeah, in the abstract, there are all the happy hormones. It's like taking the decision that from tomorrow I will go to the gym. Tomorrow I'll start my diet. Tomorrow I will do and then we produce all these happy hormones, and then it's tomorrow and it's like, I have to go to the gym. And I wonder to what extent we too often rush into this action-taking step and forget to acknowledge that groups are in a certain rush, in a certain emotional state by the end of it. Either they're overly excited because they have spent this creative, trusting, connective time together, and then take decisions or come to an agreement that might be slightly overconfident, and then they might overcommit, or they're totally exhausted after a full day or multiple days of working so intensively. And I wonder whether it wouldn't be healthier now that we are so used, and I'm thinking out loud, I'm making this up, now that we are used to working remotely anyway, to detach the action planning from the decision, to say, okay, we took this decision, let's sleep over it, come back tomorrow, think whether this is still valid, and see how we're going to implement it.
And that was exactly where my mind was going when you were talking. And I'd love to hear it because the pandemic has given us some opportunities that we can seize and use. And I am. And it's exactly the sort of thing you're saying. So, you go out on retreat with a group. I mean, maybe it's leadership development. Maybe it's strategic planning. Maybe it's some kind of new organizational structure. I mean, whatever it is. And the group reaches the decisions. They reach the action stage. The beauty now is that everybody can disperse. I mean, that might have been online, but it might have been in person because there are certain things that are better discussed in person. And the group can disperse. And as you say, have some time to think about it. I am so happy that opportunity has come to us through a very sad global COVID pandemic. And it's the willingness of the organizations I work with to meet that way, to work that way, to do the combination of, okay, we're going to be in person, and now we are following up online. And, I've got 3 projects that are going through that right now. And it is that second, third, fourth, fifth thought that is so powerful. So I met with a group of 3 government entities. They wanted to form a shared vision. We met in person because it was critical. That kind of a conversation was really necessary in person. So we met in person for a day, went away, and then we've been meeting online with shorter, kind of like hour to 2 hour meetings to continue to draft what did we hear, and now what is this shared vision. And so it's kind of an action stage in one way, but it's certainly a decision stage that is being molded afterwards with a little bit of distance from that event. That you're right, people feel very, very energized, typically, hopefully, and they also feel fatigue. And that ability to have another discussion around it is so powerful. And I think you've made me realize just how successful that has been. I mean, just going off on a tiny little tangent, I had, and I think I said this to you at some point, when I was back in 2019 and we're going into 2020, and I'm looking at my business and saying, what is it that I would really like to be able to do? One of the things that were very important to me was, how can I develop an online facilitation so that I can, with more benefits and value, help clients after the in-person? Because almost all my work was in person. And lo and behold, 2.5 years later, that's just part. And it's me learning to facilitate online. And at 25 years of business, well, which is fascinating to think about, an experience. Yet, even more so, it's the willingness of individuals and then individuals in a group to say, oh yeah, we can do this. We're now happy to do that. So there was a little bit of a off our topic about action afterwards.
And I think it perfectly fits into it because it's the ability to combine the best of both worlds. And by that, I mean that we don't have to rush into everything just because we are on site all together. And that and maybe I can jump on your tangent.
Jump away. I love the way the conversation's just flowing.
Yes, the shift from offline to online. And I came to realize that actually nothing, when it comes to the core facilitation skills, there's not much difference.
Thank you.
If you are a good facilitator on site, you will be a good facilitator online, assuming that you master the tech or have a tech host.
Yes.
So I think online you do have a little bit more of multitasking, or you need a co-pilot. Otherwise, the core skills are the same. So I would be curious to explore two topics with you. One is coming back to what you said earlier about core methods that every facilitator must be able to master or must have in their toolkit, and how they relate to the changes of facilitation. What has actually changed in 25 years? Offline, online, is it still the same, or did something big change?
So I'll start with the change and make sure it's going to tie in the core, our foundational beliefs and approaches. Miriam, I'm not so sure that much has changed. Methods to some degree, and primarily the online or the offline, the in-person, the virtual methods, definitely. We wouldn't be having this topic as a conversation, I think, 3 years ago. And I'm recognizing completely that there were many wonderful facilitators already doing extensive online facilitation. The majority, I think, discovered it in 2020. And I really concur with your statements that it's not that much different other than adapting a method to the online and knowing how to work the technology. And I think it took a lot of us, a few months to recognize that. But if I think back to March, April, May of 2020, and the quicker I realized that the beliefs, the philosophies, the principles, the approach hold. They go through. If you believe in the wisdom of a group, if you believe that we need everybody's wisdom, and I'm using Institute of Cultural Affairs core beliefs here, based in Canada, we need everybody's wisdom, that the sum is greater than the whole of the parts. If you believe in my strong belief in conversation, get together and talk things through, and maybe you combine that with a little bit of play and a little bit of work at the value of conversation. That doesn't matter if you're meeting in a hotel meeting room or a community hall or on MS Teams or Zoom or any of the other wonderful platforms. So at the beginning, I had to go back, beginning of COVID, I had to go back to what do I believe? And then, okay, how do I do this online? And it came down to tech and methods. You're absolutely right. So the change in terms of the venue, and I'm using venue in terms of the online or the in-person, I mean, that changed. We do some things differently. I thought about this a lot. What has changed incredibly over my 28 years of official facilitation business? And one thing I kind of thought about, and I'm exploring this probably because you thought it might be interesting that we talk about it at some point if it came up in this conversation. Possibly facilitators are more aware and understanding of the importance of focusing on the group participants, that it is about all of us, the participants and the facilitators, being an integral part of that group as a specific role. And what I'm wondering about is, when I started 28 years ago, was there more of a consciousness about how does the facilitator work with the group rather than how is the group working and what do I do as a facilitator to contribute? And I don't know, Miriam, if that's a change in the whole global facilitation world, the concentration on it's the facilitator, it's us. It's more us than we and me. And I'm not sure. I know that there is a point in my work and my training, and I see it with other facilitators I help, when that change in mindset comes into being. I don't know if that's a change or if it's just something that I've become even more aware of as we go through. Thoughts around that?
And I wonder, so listening to you, I wonder whether it's maybe a self-reinforcing system. 28 years ago, the organizations that would hire facilitators were different, or organizations per se were different. I assume there was more hierarchy. There was less digitization. So by definition, there was less transparency and less collaboration, just by a lack of resources and means for collaboration. So I assume that the role of a facilitator back then was already a different one. And then with organizational structures changing, organizations becoming more maybe collaborative, this might also then impact the confidence of facilitators and their self-understanding of their role.
Possibly.
And then this might reinforce one another, a facilitator then being able to emphasize the group more because the group has more power.
I had a conversation with a group of facilitators the other day, and it ties in. And the conversation was about, are the individuals we're working with within organizations, are they now, after 2.5 years of being online, working remotely, being facilitated, online sessions, have they reached a point where they believe they have the skills to work as facilitators? And will facilitators be needed? So I think, in my experience, the individuals I work with probably value a facilitator more. Yet I'm going to continue to talk about this because other ones are not feeling that. So how does that tie back in with what's changed in 28 years or 20 years? I agree with what you're saying, that the organizations have changed in that they are becoming much more knowledgeable about facilitation skills and the importance of them. I'm seeing the core skills of facilitation showing up in what are the essential skills for the next, decade or whatever century it should be. So when I think back to the start of my business, I probably did not have the planning discussions to the depth I have now about what are your beliefs about facilitation, Barb, and what approaches or methods do you like to use? Or, we like doing this when we talk together, and we believe we need to create some inclusion and some equity. And I find the client organizations know more. And perhaps that's a change. Perhaps that's something that I'm seeing more than I did, because I'm not explaining as much what facilitation is as talking with them about what they understand facilitation is and what they need. And that's very exciting to me. Not to the point as these colleagues I was talking with, not to the point that I think facilitation is not going to be needed. I'm seeing it needed even more. I think that there are meetings that people, let's say they're in a team and they meet weekly, are going to just say, we're going to facilitate ourselves.
Yes.
And that might be a challenge for those of us that work within an ongoing process, let's say, within a team and an organization. What's our responsibility to say, how are you doing? What's working for you? Miriam, you're facilitating this session, or they're rotating it. Is there anything I can do to help? I don't work in that much of an ongoing situation. So I'm wondering if my colleagues are finding that it is those internal facilitators in an organization that are experiencing this pushback of, we're good. We know how to do this. So it's something I'm keeping my eye on.
Fascinating topic. Thank you for bringing that up. Just to close the earlier one about companies becoming more educated on what it is that they need and want and look for, I think that's a beautiful development, because it allows and invites for co-creation of a facilitated project. So then the facilitator can really fulfill the role of a facilitator, instead of sometimes also putting the hat on of a consultant coming in with advice on what methods to use. So I think it really adds to the playfulness and to the co-creativity of our profession. And I believe that the more internal facilitators there are, the more external facilitators will be needed. Mm-hmm. So I have the same observation than your colleagues, and I would come to an opposite conclusion because of the following. I think that very often we don't see that we have a problem until we see that we have a problem. So if I've been sitting in bad meetings for my entire life, not even aware that it could be different, then I learn facilitation and I suddenly feel the pain of sitting in a bad meeting because I know how it could be otherwise. So more people will at first have the awareness of the need of facilitation. Then there will be first the need of training of internal facilitators. And then they will also come to the point where they realize their own limitations, that what are the topics where an external lens, an external synthesizer, someone who can play with the methods and hold the space, who is not involved in the outcomes, who doesn't have a history with the organization, where they become relevant. And I think the more organizations are educated about the value of facilitation, the more they will be willing to invest in external facilitators, because they know how much time and resources they will save by hiring an expert in certain situations.
I agree. And I have an example, very recent one that hits on a couple of your points. So I had a large organization come and ask for a day and a half online facilitation, which we just completed about 3 weeks ago. And what was fascinating about it was they recognized how important it was to have an external facilitator. And they said, we don't normally do this. But we just feel we don't know how to collect the information and the feedback and the ideas that we need from the participants. We just don't know how to do it. And they said this would be a one-time event. Yeah, isn't it fascinating that they were at least self-aware enough to say we need to bring in an external person? And then the other part then that was very exciting was that the willingness to co-create with them not having much understanding of approaches, kind of like a bigger approach, and then specific methods. And in fact, at the end, one of my the client reps said, wow, I would have just run a day and a half of PowerPoint and just talked to 20 people online and said, okay, so what do you think? And of course, I and my team did a lot more than that. We used small groups, we used Breakout, we used Miro, we used Google Sheets and slides. So two things: the increasing awareness of the value of facilitation, and still within some organizations, not the knowledge of what facilitation can bring. Then this person said, that's why we bring in the pros. I didn't realize that this was kind of the stuff that could be done. So I think that we need to be very careful. I need to be very careful to not make any sweeping assumptions. I see it all the time that every organization, and it doesn't matter if it's a corporate, for-profit, not-for-profit, small, community, large, global nonprofit, they're at very, very different stages. Yes, we don't open up a Zoom meeting and explain every feature on the bottom like we did in May of 2020. But we still, without a doubt, I have participants that come on that might have been on Zoom the second time in their life, even 2.5 years later. So it's that awareness that we need to, as always, ask questions, talk, hear our client or potential client organization's story before we start making any assumptions about the state of knowledge, state of readiness of any kind of organization towards facilitation, which goes into my whole big belief that the work that's done before the actual facilitated event is, I used to say, is equally as important as the actual facilitation. Now I say it's more important.
Yes.
And I say that to clients so that they understand what is required and what is so important and what will be the success because we're doing that pre-work.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. And what I find almost ironic is that the work of a great facilitator will almost then go unnoticed, because the majority of the work goes in the preparation to understand what is really the purpose, what is really the problem, who needs to be in the room, how do we open, what is the power dynamic, what is the trust level, how willing are they to do the work, to open up, and all these kind of questions. You need to sense it before you can even start designing the session. And then you design the session and it will almost go, or the facilitator will then almost go unnoticed because it flows and the facilitator holds the space, but the participants are doing all the work. And then it's all gone. And participants would say, oh, why did we actually need a facilitator for that?
Okay, you hope they have enough knowledge and awareness of, oh, that was helped by a facilitator. So I did the story of, it's not a story as much, but I'm thinking back 20 years where a lot of facilitators said we were trying to work ourselves out of a job. I don't believe that anymore. I do believe that there is great value in longer sessions, like a 1.5-year session, where I may be very active in facilitating. I'm thinking of some, over the years, I've been involved in multiple organizations coming together and forming some kind of a partnership, which could be a new organization. And those are often very lengthy. And if I look at the arc of my involvement, I start with a lot of collaborative discussion, and then I facilitate fairly obviously, and then we move into a little bit more co-facilitation where they're taking it on. And when all of a sudden I realize that all I'm doing is sitting there and listening or taking notes, my role is done. And they're doing it themselves, which might be something they have decided they wanted me to do is, hey, through this process, also teach us, train us. So that's the only time then that I'm working myself out of a job. Otherwise, I think there is great benefit in that external facilitator or the internal, depending on the situation, being there in a role which may be very obvious and may be much more underneath. And I'm thinking of two quick situations. I think it was in June, a few months ago, it was an hour and a half online, large group. And I think my role in the actual session was probably gently managing time, watching for who wanted to ask questions and acknowledging that, this person is going to go next. There's a lot of active facilitation. Yet the work for 2 to 3 months before, for an hour and a half with the group, was extensive because they didn't know anything about the way that we involve people. Something as simple as, I said to them, connection before content. I don't even know who coined that, but I certainly believe it. And they loved it. And they said, oh my gosh, well, how do we do that? So I gave them a whole bunch of options at the beginning. And, they ended up doing something as simple as a quick little poll and then a very short pair discussion. Yet helping them, firm beliefs, everything's focused on the firm belief. So all my work on that was primarily done before. And I looked like a timekeeper during the session, which was great. And then the one I was just talking about, I was very much facilitating for that day and a half and guiding them through set conversation methods.
Thank you for the examples. And I would say that for the outside, it might look as if you were timekeeping.
Yeah.
And still holding the space. I think it's something that it sounds woo-woo and it's not. I think we often miss or underestimate the impact of having a presence. And I do believe that it exists online, having the presence to create this container where people dare to speak up, where they trust each other, where they let each other speak, where they listen deeply, and where they respect the shared principles. And if you would not sit there to, air quotes, keep the time, it wouldn't go that way.
Because I'm keeping the time and gently moving people on to the next topic. I am observing, listening, and being ready to respond and invite as things unfold. Yeah. So think of a remark comes up that is very derogatory. It's being ready to acknowledge that happened, and depending on it, ask others what they think about it, or if necessary, ask that no longer continues, whatever that the situation can be. And that is what we're doing when it often looks like we're not doing something. Think of open space technology.
Yes.
We have a role as a facilitator as we wander. We set it up. Everybody does the topics. They go off into their groups, self-selected. We have a responsibility to wander the room and just watch for those areas where an intervention may be needed, because something may not be safe. So changes, Miriam, this just brought me back to what's changed. And knowledge about certain things have changed and wording. So psychological safety was probably not a term that I heard back in the 1990s. Now, were there similar terms? Yes. And I'm trying to think what we would have talked about. Great awareness of the need for helping the group create a place that we probably said more than space, or an atmosphere or a climate where they felt they could speak up, they could contribute, or designing, which is what I believe. I believe that people need to contribute in so many different ways, that they're comfortable and then they're uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. So if a person is not going to talk in a large group, let's get there. Let's design a method that they can contribute in a different way. So I think we had obviously believed that we had the same ideas about creating a space, about psychological safety, certainly about diversity, equity, inclusion. Just the words have come to the forefront, and probably very much in the last 10 years more so. And a lot of it is because of authors writing. Amy Edmondson on the Fearless Organization, her books before that, writing with research behind it that we then can take and apply. We can do the knowledge transfer, as a lot of health organizations talk about, into our facilitation work with terms that are used. And I didn't talk about a container 15 to 20 years ago. And yet there's a concept that is there in people's mind, and some organizations understand it. Others I will talk about, within this room that we're in, within this circle that we're in. And that's yet the values of respect and inclusion, equity, and they're there. They're just expressed in a different way. So a change, I think, is there's a lot more, research and knowledge put out in a way that we can understand it and our participants can understand it.
Yeah. Hello, listener. Are you tired of listening to my podcast voice praising our sponsor Session Lab in each episode? I think it's time to pass the mic over to you. So if you are as much of a Session Lab fan and user as I am, please share your experience and praise, and don't be shy of add a sentence of self-promo. Send me your soundbite and you might hear yourself on the next show and find your name and URL in the show notes. I'm looking forward to hearing from you.